Well, good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Ontario Public Health Association, I'd like to thank you for joining this webinar this morning. This webinar was an invitation from a subcommittee of our OPHA alcohol work group, a subcommittee that's been working on the issue of alcohol marketing in youth. And my name is Kathy Edwards. I'm a public health nurse with Kingston, Frontenac, Lennox and Addington Public Health in the East Region of Ontario. I also co-chair the OPHA alcohol work group with my colleague Pat Hoff from Toronto Public Health. Just wanted to start off by just saying youth alcohol use, as we all know, is associated with risky behavior, violence, injuries, and social problems. Provincial governments across Canada are moving forward with less restrictive alcohol policies that will further normalize alcohol use among youth. In Ontario, in particular, policy changes such as corner store alcohol sales will significantly increase the availability and marketing of alcohol. The government has stated that they want to treat adults like adults. But in their efforts to increase alcohol access, we are questioning who is advocating for the safety and protection of youth from these policy changes. And just to go over a few features of the webinar, as you probably already know, the participant line has been muted, so please use the chat box for any questions or if you need help at any time. The webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded to OPHA's YouTube page afterwards. There are a couple documents of interest in the file pod on the webinar page. At the moment are the presentation slides, so people are free to download those. Yeah, I think that's about it. We're going to have a couple of poll questions during the webinar, one at the beginning, one at the end, so watch for those. And just to give you a bit of background on OPHA and the activities of OPHA, they do much work in the area of healthy public policy, strengthening the public health workforce, expanding knowledge about health, and supporting cross-disciplinary networks across Ontario. An interesting fact about OPHA is that we were founded in 1949 by a group of doctors who wanted to see an increase in the emphasis on preventative medicine. As a charity, we've continued to honor this purpose through our vision, which prioritizes working together to achieve optimal health for all. And since being founded by physicians, membership base has broadened to include a diverse base of members. Our mission of providing leadership has evolved over time to reflect the breadth of public health, from health promotion, health protection, to prevention work in Ontario, as well as strengthening the impact of those who are active in public and community health. And one way that OPHA really strengthens public health is through supporting topic-level provincial working groups, such as the OPHA Alcohol Work Group. We currently have about 38 members representing 22 public health units in Ontario. So the objectives for the webinar for today are to basically look at what the current landscape of alcohol marketing looks like, to learn about the current research on the prevalence of alcohol marketing and how that impacts youth, and then to explore ways to collaborate to address this issue. We're going to leave about 40 minutes at the end of the webinar to have some stakeholder discussion. So we'll have, at the beginning, I'm going to introduce in a few moments a colleague that will talk a little bit about what the Marketing Advocacy Subcommittee has been doing to date. And then we will have two presentations from Dr. David Jernigan, as well as from Dr. Catherine Paradis. So we're just going to put up a poll question now. So we're looking to find out if your agency is currently participating or planning to participate in any work around alcohol marketing in youth, just to get a sense of if there is some work being done in this area. So it looks like there's some work being done and also some interest. Okay. Thanks, everyone. So what I'd like to do now is introduce Brianne Peshko. Brianne is a community health promoter at the North Bay Parry Sound District Health Unit, and she's going to briefly discuss what our alcohol marketing subcommittee has been doing to date.
Hello, everyone. Before I delve into sort of the activities of the Alcohol Marketing Advocacy Subcommittee, I just really wanted to set the stage for today's discussion. We wanted to show you how prolific alcohol marketing really is. So it can include things like traditional marketing, branded advertising, online and social media promotion, event promotion, and even street promotion. So this slide here is to really reiterate the need for changes to alcohol marketing in Canada and the need for us to work together on this issue, especially when we think about the implications. So in 2018, members of the OPHA Alcohol Work Group formed the Alcohol Marketing Advocacy Subcommittee. So this group created a plan for the 2018 to 2019 year, and one of the big activities of the group is to engage stakeholders to seek organizations interested in collaborating and consulting on this issue. Because currently right now we are made up predominantly of representation for public health, and our hope for today is to really increase momentum on this issue and engage with other partners in this work as well to really have a unified approach to alcohol marketing across Ontario. And so the purpose of this collective action is to increase the awareness of the prevalence of alcohol marketing, the impact of alcohol marketing on youth, current policy landscape and the lack of regulation, and also explore potential policy solutions around alcohol marketing. And as Kathy mentioned, there are some files available to download around some of the key messaging that we have developed so far as a subcommittee and that we want to further develop as a collective group, and also a really broad overview of sort of the actions and the way forward with the subcommittee.
Thanks very much, Brianne. It's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. David Jernigan. Dr. Jernigan is best known for his action research approach to the issue of alcohol advertising, marketing, and promotion, and its influence on young people. His work has led to better advertising regulations and a clearer understanding of the evolving structure of the alcohol industry. His work is policy relevant and scientifically rigorous. Dr. Jernigan has been very active in translating research findings into policy and practice. He testifies regularly at city, state, and national levels around alcohol advertising and use, alcohol availability, and taxation. He also trains advocates around the world using the best evidence. Dr. Jernigan?
Thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity to present. I'm very excited that you all are trying to move forward on these important issues. So just a little reminder of alcohol's role in health worldwide. It is a causal factor in more than 200 disease and injury conditions. We are having a little technical problem. Yes, I am able to spell, but the slides are showing up truncating some of the words, and the organizers have informed me they will send out correct versions of the slides following the webinar. There is no safe level of alcohol consumption for cancer risk, and many women in particular are unaware that, at least in the U.S., 15% of cancer cases are considered caused by, breast cancer cases are considered caused by alcohol in the U.S., and a third of those cases happen at less than a drink and a half a day. Alcohol also makes inequities much worse in that the harms from a given amount of alcohol are always going to be higher if you're poor than if you're wealthier. If there's a health benefit for light drinking, and that research is under increasing critique and skepticism, there's clearly no benefit for young people under age 44, and alcohol causes more death and disability than a whole range of other things that get much more attention. To also say I like to decorate my slides with ads from the alcohol industry. This is an ad for whipped cream vodka. She's dressed only in whipped cream, and the tagline is, "Been whipped lately." Regarding young people, globally, alcohol is the leading risk factor for death and disability among persons ages 15 to 49 here in the U.S. Alcohol dependence is a disease of adolescence and young adulthood, in that the incidence of the onset of alcohol dependence peaks in the U.S. at age 18, and the likelihood of becoming addicted declines dramatically from age 25 onward. In Canada, alcohol has consistently over the past 3 decades been the #2 risk factor for death and disability among persons ages 15 to 49, and has risen substantially over that period in the whole population, with one notable change that I want to draw attention to. Smoking has dropped from #1 cause of death and disability to #4 in Canada. This is proof that change can happen. We can take on these risk factors and make a difference. In the U.S., this is all about preventing early initiation. The longer we can put off people starting to drink, the better. In the U.S., young people start drinking before our purchase age of age 21. Compared to people who wait until they're 21, young people start drinking before age 15. 5 times more likely to develop alcohol problems later in life, 4 times more likely to become dependent, 6 times or more likely to be in a physical fight or motor vehicle crash, and so on. Alcohol marketing encompasses a large sphere and includes everything from stakeholder marketing and corporate social responsibility to product design, pricing, distribution. I'm going to focus most of my time here in the inner circle on what we consider traditional marketing activities, advertising and promotion, but it is important to just nod at some of the other key factors. Product, there are particularly dangerous products for young people currently on the market. I know Canada still permits caffeinated malt beverages to be sold. We've banned those in the U.S. because we found that these created a population of wide-awake drunks, young people who thought that they weren't impaired because they were still wide awake, but when you tested them for motor skills, they were just as impaired, clearly dangerous products. Price and tax are another key lever, particularly for young people who are more price sensitive than the rest of the population. One of the most important things we can do, and we've been cheered by some of the examples from Canada of the use of minimum unit pricing as well as tax to raise the price of alcoholic beverages. Place was mentioned in the introduction. If you're getting more corner store sales, there's an increased likelihood you're going to get things like this, which is a corner store in Australia, where every window is covered by signage for alcohol. This is the kind of signage that you can't turn the page, you can't change the channel. A young person walking to school by this outlet has no choice but to be exposed to the advertising. But as I said, I want to spend most of my time on promotion, and it's important to understand that modern alcoholic beverages are of their essence marketed beverages. The purpose of marketing, any marketing class will teach, is to promote brand switching among existing brands, protect market share for competitors, inform the public of new products, and then there are 2 industries that leave off the fourth one. Those 2 industries would be tobacco and alcohol. But clearly, one purpose of marketing is to attract new users. The alcohol industry is huge. Alcohol sales are worth more than $1.5 trillion a year worldwide. And the producers industry, the folks that do most of the marketing, is highly consolidated and concentrated. 10 largest beer companies sold 2/3 of the world's beer in 2017. 10 largest spirits companies sold more than half of the world's spirits. If we combined the revenues of the 10 largest alcohol producers in the world, they'd be the 54th largest economy. In the U.S., alcoholic beverages are the 8th most profitable industry. They're the 21st most profitable in the world, more so than pharmaceuticals or sodas. And key to their dominance and profitability is marketing. Why is that the case? Because what marketing does for these companies is it functions as what economists call a significant barrier to entry. And let me give an example. Anheuser-Busch InBev, the largest beer company in the world, because they produce so much, their cost of advertising per barrel sold is significantly lower than those of that of its competitors. The same is likely true of Diageo, the world's largest spirits makers. The marketing spend gives them a comparative advantage. It helps keep other players out and keep what are called oligopoly profits, higher profits than if there were more competition in the market. Those oligopoly profits in turn support more marketing spend. The marketing spend also for the companies counters the increasingly bad health news. So they spend a lot on marketing. Anheuser-Busch InBev spent $6.2 billion US globally in 2017, more than Coca-Cola, Toyota, General Motors, or Ford. And according to US figures, the alcohol marketing spend is increasingly going to social media. AB InBev spent almost double on digital and social media what they spent on traditional measured media in 2017. Molson Coors also spent more on digital and social than on the traditional media of print, broadcast, and outdoor. Just some quick examples of alcohol marketing. The top picture, those are children in Chile, Cristal being the best-selling beer in Chile. The bottom one's a picture I took in the Philippines in a small town. I was standing in front of a church and a school as I took the picture. This is a local Alcopop, those sweet fizzy products, popular among youth, and the tagline, "So good you'll get hooked." This is Uganda, the beer ad, completely unavoidable. It takes up the entire side of a building. This is one from the US, from Facebook, quoting Dr. Seuss. Why fit in when you were born to stand out? Alcohol marketing is not supposed to appeal or target young people, so why are they quoting Dr. Seuss? In the US, they're not allowed to make health claims for alcohol, so this isn't making a health claim for the alcohol. This is one of those super strong, this comes in a 8, 12, and 14% alcohol in a 23.5-ounce can. That is about 5.5 cans of regular beer. It's sold as a single serving, but the tagline, "A wild Brazilian berry, uva is part of the grape family and has been revered for centuries for its magical healing powers." So they're not claiming health claims for the alcohol, they're claiming it for the flavoring from the berry. Alcohol and violence, this is Tecate, real men use their fists again and again because Tecate sponsors boxing. But let's move to digital and social media. The alcohol industry is on Facebook, but the kids mostly aren't because they know that's where we are. Nonetheless, this is the kind of thing you can see from lovely brands like Facebook, like Four Loko. If this isn't you after Thanksgiving, you're doing it wrong. Clearly not a healthy message. But Instagram is where a lot of young people are. And Instagram, of particular concern are paid influencers. Beautiful women like Miss Universe, and teen role models like DJ Khaled, who got in a lot of trouble for this. He's got a big promotional contract with Ciroc Vodka and had so many posts on his Instagram feed with Ciroc, including one where he was sitting at the breakfast table with a bowl of cornflakes and his bottle of Ciroc. There was no indication that these were paid ads. And as I say, they got in a lot of trouble for this, but he's clearly not alone. A study in Australia looked at the top 70 Australian Instagram influencers and their alcohol-related content, found that 73% of those influencers featured alcohol brands in their Instagram accounts in the last year, and 39%, about 2 out of 5, did not disclose that this was paid advertising. On Twitter, this is something I follow Four Loko on Twitter. Yeah, I'm in that crazy. And so this I actually complained to the Beer Institute, and she brought it to Twitter, to Four Loko's attention, and I got a shocked letter back from Four Loko saying, oh my God, we can't believe this happened. We will definitely retrain our staff that's monitoring our feed. Nonetheless, this clearly is not the kind of thing that should be going up. And I just happened to log on one day and see it. There's no systematic monitoring of my awareness. Snapchat, Diageo get a lot of trouble over this. Kids were using the Captain Morgan ghost and sticking their faces in it, sending it to their friends, and it forced Diageo to pull all their advertising from Snapchat. YouTube, what a mess, what a wild, wild west. I'm just going to show you some of the viewership figures for the most popular alcohol videos on YouTube. Millions of people are watching these videos, and YouTube is an advantageous medium for marketers because it's a pull medium, not a push. People are choosing. They're going after and finding these videos. They're not being fed them like TV commercials, so it's assumed that people pay more attention to them and they have more impact. Are kids seeing them? There was a research group in the U.S. that created fake profiles of 14 and 17 and 19-year-old YouTube users, and then looked at the 16 brands that one of our surveys had found were most popular among young people, found that every one of those fake profiles with an underage age was able to subscribe to the 16 alcohol brand YouTube channels, even though YouTube has a policy that if your age on YouTube is under 21, you're not allowed to get onto the channels. Clearly that policy is not working, because on average 2/3 of the brand's channels were successfully viewed when going in through these underage profiles. Other media, movies, there's a group at Dartmouth Medical School that monitors the top 100 top box office movies in the U.S. They've been doing it for years. From 1996 to 2019, tobacco brand appearances went down significantly. So here's what happened to the tobacco brands. You can see a precipitous drop. And here's what happened to the alcohol brands. Went down slightly on the right. Those are our R-rated movies, the ones that are supposed to be for adults, but a really dramatic increase in the G and PG-rated movies. Those are supposed to be the ones suitable for kids. In other media, one of my colleagues here at BU led a team looking at the 720 most popular urban pop, country, and rock songs, found that 38% of them mentioned alcohol and about 1 out of 8 a specific brand, and so on. How much are kids seeing across all these media? One of the best ways to study that is using something called Ecological Momentary assessment, when kids are issued wearable cameras, and then they get prompted at various points during their day simply to have the camera take a picture. It records whatever they're seeing. So this isn't self-report. This is actually what's in their environment. In New Zealand, children 11 to 13 were exposed 4.5 times a day to alcohol marketing, and this excluded on screens. In the U.S., a similar study in Los Angeles followed children over a 2-week period. Children age 11 to 14 were being exposed an average of over 3 times a day to alcohol marketing, with TV and outdoor advertising dominating. So what impact does this have on kids? The best way to study that is to do long-term longitudinal studies. The first systematic review of these found 13, and all of the studies in that review basically found the more the kids were seeing, the more likely they were to start drinking, or if already drinking, to drink more. I led the next systematic review, published a couple of years ago. We found 12 more studies, 9 unique cohorts following 35,000 participants in Europe, Asia, and North America. Follow-up ranged from 9 months to 8 years. All of these found significant associations, particularly in the movement from experimentation, 1 or 2 drinks or a sip to full-blown heavier drinking. And then there's a Cochrane review forthcoming on this topic and a special supplement to the Journal of Studies on Alcohol and Drugs. I'm told it's likely to make similar findings. We'll see when that comes out. One of the things we've focused on here is the activities of specific brands because alcohol marketing is branded. All those long-term studies have simply asked kids generally, what are you seeing, and then their general consumption behavior. But you can make the ties much more closely if you can link branded consumption behavior with branded alcohol advertising exposure. So in the U.S., we did the first ever survey of young people's alcohol consumption by brand, about 1,000 young people. It was one point in time, so we can't make causal statements, but we could use it to refute some common myths, such as, are kids drinking the same brands of adults? Nope. Are kids drinking the cheapest brands? Nope. Only one of the 90 cheapest brands in our survey was among the top 25 that kids are actually drinking. Are kids drinking the brands that are easiest for them to get? Nope. Even when they're stealing it from their parents' liquor cabinet, kids are stealing, quote unquote, the good stuff. And how do they know what the good stuff is? We also were able to associate brands and type of alcohol with consequences. So kids drinking 8 specific brands were more likely to experience fights and injuries, and kids drinking those supersized alcohol pops like Four Loko exclusively were 6 times more likely than other kids to suffer injuries. We also have lots of exposure data, and so we found, for instance, that kids who self-reported exposure to advertising for a brand were 3 times more likely to drink that brand. We also have the Nielsen data at the population level. Brands exposing themselves heavily to young people were associated with a 5 times greater odds of young people consuming that brand. So more recently, that group at Dartmouth found that kids who have an aspirational brand, a brand that they would like to drink, are at greater risk of ever binge or hazardous drinking at baseline, and then over time, longitudinally, were more likely to become binge or hazardous drinking. I'm going to keep buzzing through this. How does the effect work? This was another study that looked at lots of different exposures and developed an exposure score for young people. What they found was that greater exposure to substance-related media increased young people's normative beliefs, in particular about pure alcohol use, how much their peers were using, which then predicted greater alcohol use. Other studies have found this. Basically, media, and particularly social media, is a super peer. That's what's important to understand. It magnifies that peer effect that's already in kids' heads. The main protection from kids from this is alcohol industry self-regulation. I like to say this is not just the fox minding the chicken coop. This is the fox building the chicken coop. I used to have to show lots of examples of the industry violating its own codes. I don't really have to do that anymore. There are some systematic reviews. This one of more than 100 studies of alcohol industry self-regulation from multiple countries. None of those studies have found that alcohol industry self-regulation is effective. The policy options for alcohol marketing, no regulation, which a number of companies do, industry self-regulation, which is ineffective, co-regulation, also not very effective. That's when you have the industry at the table along with government. Partial bans, a very mixed bag. Some of them can be effective, but others, like time watersheds, are more problematic because so many kids are watching TV late at night alone in their room. Total bans, the best way to go, and that's increasingly where countries are heading. Russia at this point has put in a whole bunch of different bans. Lithuania just put in a new ban. Ireland just put in some partial bans. This is a moving policy issue around the world. Another underutilized strategy is counter-advertising, particularly youth-driven counter-advertising. This was effective in tobacco. It's greatly underused in alcohol. Just a cheap ad, if you want to know more about this, the Global Alcohol Policy Alliance does a global meeting on alcohol policy every 2 years, and the next one is in March of 2020 at Dublin Castle in Ireland. Also, right now, the World Health Organization today is opening a global consultation on their global alcohol strategy. The strategy has not had anywhere near the effects that we would like it to have had. One of the best buys under that strategy is restrictions on alcohol marketing. And if you go to WHO's website and look at the alcohol page, there's an opportunity for people all over the world to weigh in on what they think the World Health Organization should be doing. My last words to you, Albert Einstein: those who have the privilege to know have a duty to act, and in that action are the seeds of new knowledge. My friends, I believe we have knowledge, and now is the time to act. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jernigan. I just wanted to remind participants to enter any questions or comments in the chat box. We'll be reviewing those and discussing them at the end. It's my pleasure to now introduce to you Dr. Catherine Paradis. Dr. Paradis is CCSA's and one of Canada's leading experts on alcohol. He joined the Canadian Centre on Substance Use and Addiction in 2014, wanting to participate in developing and implementing alcohol-related policies at the federal level. Her recent work to describe alcohol-related emergency department consultations by adolescents and young adults has been instrumental to some regulatory amendments at both the provincial and the federal level. For example, Quebec Bill 170 and the Canada Food and Drug Act. Since joining CCSA, Catherine has seized the opportunity to develop new projects with the view to mobilize communities in research and preventive intervention. She has led the implementation of the Post-Secondary Education Partnership, Alcohol Harms, and the development of its framework. Since 2017, she co-chairs the partnership, which currently includes over half of all Canadian universities. Catherine is also one of the experts responsible for producing Canada's low-risk alcohol drinking guidelines. She holds a PhD in sociology from the University of Montreal. Dr. Paradis?
Oui, bonjour, chers collègues. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present to you today a study that took form a couple of years ago. Tim Stockwell from Pfizer and I were having dinner, and we shared common interests to conduct a study on alcohol advertising in Canada. As Dr. Jernigan just mentioned, while the WHO has identified advertising as one of the 3 best buys to reduce alcohol-related harms, we were concerned with the status of advertising regulations in Canada, and more specifically, we were very concerned with online advertising. Moreover, because I had just been named the co-chair of the Post-Secondary Education Partnership on Alcohol Harms, PEPA, we thought it would be an interesting idea to look at the type of online alcohol advertising that university students were exposed to and the potential impact of this exposition. So we did a pilot study with that in mind at the University of Victoria's campus in British Columbia in 2017. That study got a lot of attention, namely from Health Canada, and so we decided to expand it to other campuses, and this is what I will be presenting to you today, knowing that some of you might have seen the preliminary results that were solely focused on the Victoria's campus. Moving on. So a little bit of alcohol advertising 101 in Canada. So it is regulated at both the federal and the provincial levels. At the federal level, we know that all radio and TV ads need to comply with the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunication Commission, the CRTC code for broadcast advertising of alcoholic beverages. It contained 17 specific guidelines, and all broadcast ads need to obtain pre-clearance by broadcasters. In addition, provinces and territories have implemented restrictions on alcohol advertising similar to those outlined in the CRTC code. With digital media overtaking other traditional media channels such as television, radio, and the press, several provinces, including British Columbia, Ontario, Quebec, and Nova Scotia, have adopted restrictions on alcohol advertising and marketing, which apply to both broadcast and non-broadcast ads, including web advertising. So we could all think we're golden, right? A nice federal code, provincial regulatory agencies that use it and even expand the code to the web. This is really extraordinary. And this may also explain why every year there are in fact very, very few CRTC code violations that are being recorded. However, that's not necessarily the reality. And this may simply correspond to what experts have been claiming for years, that alcohol industry self-regulation results in a loss of policy control over alcohol marketing and advertising. Indeed, since 1997, the CRTC disbanded mandatory government pre-clearance of advertising in deference to provincial regulation and self-regulations by broadcasters and the industry. So since then, consumer groups or agencies who may have a concern about the content of a specific alcoholic beverage advertisement need to submit a complaint to the Ad Standards website for the Standards Council to evaluate whether the ad violates the CRTC code or not. If the complaint focuses on spirits, well, before directing it to the council, Ad Standards staff need to take an additional step by making determination that there may be an infraction of one or more provision of the self-regulatory Spirits Canada Code of Responsible Advertising and Marketing. So in this context, a small number of reported violations may not reflect an advertising landscape truly promoting safe and responsible alcohol use, but it may rather be the result of a system in which a CRTC code violation can only be recorded if a complaint is submitted by the public and then receives an adverse evaluation from an industry-backed council. An additional concern is that the apparent loss of control over alcohol marketing and advertising may be even more pronounced online, where alcohol is not only advertised on alcohol brand websites, but also portrayed and promoted on social platforms by drinking venues, bars, pubs, nightclubs, etc. So a recent UK study found that drinking venues regularly post on social platforms, and that is not uncommon for bars to present images associating alcohol with social success, sexual attractiveness, and intoxication. In Quebec, drinking venues more than brands have been singled out for promoting events and alcoholic beverage in a way that encourages sexism and intoxication. And we see here on this slide an example. So a vodka brand on the web, so when an alcohol brand has its web page, and then we see how vodka is being presented by a drinking venue on a social platform. And you will see that a lot of the pictures in this presentation are blurred. It's because they were all taken from from social media platforms, and although once students post images there, they are public, and we can use them, we decided to not publicly shame them and have blurred the pictures. So that is the explanation. It's not a bad quality. Okay, so a lot of advertising online, and so given that virtually all Canadians aged 15 to 24 use social network sites, and that almost all youth are likely to be exposed to alcohol-related content on social platforms, that has been well documented in Norwegian studies, well, Canadian youth might routinely be exposed to alcohol marketing and advertising that violates the CRTC code. From a public health perspective, this is concerning, given that the highest proportion of heavy drinking for both sexes in Canada is among those 18 to 34. We have about a third of drinkers in that age categories that are heavy drinkers. And among young people who attend college and universities, preliminary results based on the 2018 pilot phase of the Canadian Post-Secondary Education Alcohol and Drug Survey, the new CPADS, showed that it was 2/3 of university and college drinkers who reported heavy drinking in the past 30 days. So it is with this context in mind that we designed a study that would have three specific goals. So first, we wanted to document the scope of the CRTC code violation by drinking venues, posting alcohol-related content on social platforms. We also wanted to assess whether CRTC code violation by drinking venues relates to their popularity among university students, and we certainly wanted to assess whether CRTC code violations by drinking venues related to students' drinking behaviors. And so for phase one of our study, through recruitment flyers posted across campuses on 4 Canadian campuses in Canada, so University of Victoria in British Columbia, Queen's University in Ontario, Bishop's University in Quebec, and Dalhousie University in Nova Scotia. So for phase one, through recruitment flyers posted across these campuses, data from samples of legal age students who had been to a bar, a pub, or a nightclub at least once a month over the course of their previous semesters, we were gathered for a total of 477 students. These students were invited to fill out an online questionnaire that included questions about their favorite bars, how often they went there, why, and what were their drinking behaviors. Based on the data collected through phase one, the most popular local drinking venues were identified in these 4 campus towns. While our initial goal was to identify the 16 most popular drinking venues on each campus, at the University of Dalhousie and Bishop's University, students' responses only allowed identifying 14 and 12 venues respectively. So in total, we have 58 popular local drinking venues across 4 campuses. Once phase one was completed and we had identified those bars, we sampled advertisements and promotions from the Facebook and Instagram accounts of these 58 popular bars, and we selected up to 20 images from the Facebook and Instagram accounts of each venue. These images were then evaluated against the CRTC code by 2 other investigators who were blind to the popularity ratings of the drinking venues from which the images were drawn. The 9 images attaining the highest score for violation were selected and presented in a mosaic. At the end, for each campus, we had a booklet containing 16 picture mosaic, 1 for each of the favorite bars. But of course, for Dal, the booklet had 14 mosaic, and for Bishop, it contained 12 mosaic. And here's an example of a mosaic. Again, the pictures are blurred. So if you were from Queen's University, for example, you received a booklet that had 16 pages, each page representing 1 popular bar around Queen. Bring on to the next slide. So for phase 2 of our study, we gathered sample of approximately 20 participants from those who in phase 1 had agreed to be contacted again. These participating students were invited to a boardroom where we provided them with the picture mosaic booklets. And then they were instructed to rate each picture mosaic for adherence to each of the 17 CRTC criteria. So an example of questions would be, do any of these images attempt to influence non-drinkers of any age to drink or to purchase alcoholic beverages, which is guideline 1 of the CRTC code? Or do any of these images portray any such product or its consumption in an immoderate way? And students had to respond on a 5-point scale. The rating exercise was repeated between 12 and 16 times, depending on how many popular local drinking venues had been identified at the particular campus. Once the students concluded this component of the research, we computed overall scores representing mean level of compliance for the CRTC code. And based on those, we conducted a series of multivariate regressions that I will be presenting now in the next slide. So this is what we found. So just descriptive results. So regarding students' drinking behaviors, students on average drink 1.92 days per week, and on average consume 3.2 drinks in a single occasion. Regarding drinking in context and consuming alcohol when attending bars, students' average response was 3.42, meaning more than half of the time. So when they go out to bars, they do drink. This is the interesting slide. So regarding the 17 code items mean level of compliance across bars. So let me show you what is represented in this figure here. So it presents for each CRTC code guidelines the percentage of drinking venues rated by students as being compliant with the code. So for example, for guideline 12 in green, according to which commercial messages for alcoholic beverages shall not introduce the product in such a way that it may be associated with the operation of any vehicle requiring skills, students said, you know, yeah, 70% of drinking venues post images that comply with this particular guideline. Same thing with criteria number 16, which says that images shall not portray persons with any such products in situation in which the consumption of alcohol is prohibited. Students also said, yeah, bars posting on Facebook and Instagram seem to comply with this guideline. However, for the remaining 15 guidelines, students evaluated that no more than 46% and as little as 1.7% of drinking venues posted images on social platforms that adhere to the CRTC code. So really there is no compliance with the CRTC code by the bars that are popular among university and college students. And then it was time to move to the analysis to first assess the link between a bar's popularity and its compliance with the CRTC code. And overall, we found that a decrease in the mean level of compliance with the CRTC code was significantly associated with a 1% increase in the popularity score of drinking venues. So put differently, there was a significant association between students' preference for certain drinking venues and these venues' propensity to post images on social platforms that did violate the CRTC code in general. So the first line is for the CRTC code in general, but you also see that there were 8 specific guidelines, which when venues posted images that violated these specific guidelines, they tended to be more popular among students. And then finally the kicker, and by that I mean the association between bars' overall compliance and the reported drinking behavior of the students who frequent these bars, we found that a 1% increase in the overall mean level of compliance with the CRTC code was significantly associated with less drinking days, less drinking per occasion, and a lesser likelihood of consuming alcohol when attending a drinking venue. So overall, these results indicate that the lightest drinkers prefer drinking venues whose images posted on social platforms comply with the CRTC code, or contrary-wise, that the heaviest drinkers tend to prefer the drinking venues whose images posted on social platforms are less compliant with the CRTC code. So a central result of this study is that from the point of view of the average Canadian university students, not dinosaurs like myself, but really the students themselves, popular drinking venues are overwhelmingly posting content that contravene to the CRTC code and support a culture of excessive drinking. In Nova Scotia, Quebec, Ontario, and BC, that is 4 provinces where regulatory agencies have restrictions on web alcohol advertising. Well, students evaluated that for 15 out of 17 CRTC code guidelines, less than 50% of drinking venues post content that complies with the code. In particular, drinking venues tend to post images that associate alcohol with immoderate consumption, social status, personal success, and achievements. And clearly, the current self-regulatory system fails Canadian youth by not taking action when a great number of alcohol portrayals blatantly support a culture of excessive drinking. And moreover, given that alcohol ads routinely portray women as sexual objects and often link alcohol consumption to sexual success, this unregulated context may be especially risky for young women by contributing to alcohol-facilitated sexual assault situations. Secondly, our study showed that there was a significant association between drinking venues, a likelihood of posting images that violate the CRTC code, and students' preferences for these venues. So it illustrates that perhaps by posting non-compliant content, drinking venues manage to grab the attention of students and bring them in. This puts forward the obvious: in a competitive environment where there are no legal consequences to posting content that violates the CRTC code, drinking venues seeking to attract students will have absolutely no qualms about posting images that normalize and trivialize excessive drinking. And finally, our study brought to light the extent to which the CRTC code violation relates to drinking behaviors. Among students, those who drink more often, more per occasion, and who are more likely to drink alcohol when going out to bars tend to prefer venues whose images posted on platforms violate the guidelines. This might be, of course, a result of natural selection, where the heaviest drinkers attend venues that post images indicated they might meet others who drink like them, and they seem to think that it's a nice thing to do to drink in excess. But nonetheless, in the light that students consume more and more often for each 1% decrease in compliance, we need to acknowledge that when bars post images that promote excessive drinking, it once again may contribute to glamorization of heavy drinking, which in return may incite young Canadians to drink more. And once again, this may have more severe repercussions for young women. We know that in Canada now, girls aged 12 to 19 have higher hospitalization rates for alcohol abuse than boys. And women who say they sometimes or often consume more alcohol than they should are twice as likely to be victims of completed, attempted, or suspected sexual assault. So twice as likely than those who only sporadically or never use alcohol. So this is, of course, another cause for concern. There were, of course, limitations with this study. Besides the usual challenges associated with cohort studies, we were then not able to establish causality. Also, the process by which images were selected and put into Mosaic cannot be considered representative of all alcohol-related posts in Facebook and on Instagram. And this can be considered a limitation. But our methodology was selected to highlight that the CRTC code should be applied to all published content. Any violation of the guidelines can be considered cause for concern, and I think we certainly showed that there was cause for concern. Also, because of the innovative nature of this study, it lacks standardized measures, so we had to create our own survey about whether ads were violating or not the CRTC code. But given that it was adapted directly from the CRTC code, we would argue that our instrument had faced validity. And thirdly, by focusing specifically on drinking venues considered popular in Campus Town, we're wondering about the generalizability of the prison's findings. But it should be said that the results were all similar across all the 4 campus towns in 4 different provinces. So we think that this is not by accident, but a general phenomenon across the country. So this study contributes to broader consensus showing there is reason for concern regarding the use of social media as a platform for marketing alcohol. Our results call for a revision of the CRTC code and greater restrictions for alcohol marketing and advertising. 12 years ago, it was suggested by Canadian researchers that to increase public health and safety, Canadian policy should aim to support and improve the current self-regulatory system and eventually ban both broadcast and non-broadcast alcohol ads. Although there have been several doubts as to whether a total ban would succeed, at least 2 countries have been taking steps in that direction now. In 2015, the Finnish Parliament adopted a law that restricts any alcohol-related web content that is intended to be shared by consumers. And in Sweden, a new law will forbid commercial advertising on social media to be used to market alcohol products. So really, these initiatives are bringing to light that proper enforcement requires persistent monitoring and regional collaboration for enforcing policies on social media advertising, something that in Canada we might want to explore, and I'm very grateful to the OPHA for doing this webinar today on this topic. And finally, I just want to say that this study is also a stark reminder to provincial regulatory agencies to review their practices to ensure that alcohol advertising guidelines are applied and enforced consistently. Thank you very much. That's it for me.
Thank you so much, Catherine. I think the phrase that keeps going through my mind is one that Dr. Jernigan shared in his presentation, is that social media is a super peer. The normalization of excessive consumption and risky drinking, when we look at your research in licensed venues surrounding campuses across Canada and across the world, really can be contributing to this whole, I guess, culture of excessive consumption that we're seeing. Many university towns in Ontario have just come through their homecoming weekends. Kingston, just last weekend, we had 10,000 to 12,000 people drinking in our university district on the streets, and it does present many, many challenges for our local government, for emergency services workers, etc. And it's a huge risk for the students themselves, and it's alarming that marketing is contributing to this behavior. I just wanted to, sorry, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say, it's funny you talk about Dr. Jernigan's super peer, because I also marked that on the margin of my presentation when I it is indeed those pictures, and if you would see them not blurred, they're really shocking, and it is a super peer. And one thing that one student mentioned to me while we were doing this study is, the student said, you know what's the worst? He said, I go to these bars, so I don't need to go on their Instagram or Facebook pages to see what it's like. I know I'm there. The sad thing, though, is that their younger brothers and sisters, 12 and 13 years old, they're the ones who are going on the webpage of those bars to see, hey, what is it going to be like when I'm 18 and I can go? And this is what they see. And they are then, forced to think that this is what it should be.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I just wanted to, we'll just move forward now just with our stakeholder discussion, and just to remind folks to please type questions, comments, queries into the chat box. We've pulled a few up already, and I just wanted to, I guess, start maybe by one of the first questions that came in was for Dr. Jernigan. And the question or the comment is, locally, we have had a municipality go back on its corporate sponsorship policy that prohibits alcohol advertising at the request of a local resident. One of the arguments they made was, kids can see these advertisements on TV, internet, billboards, etc., so what is the big deal if they can also see them at our ball diamond? What would you say to this? Can you point to any research on alcohol advertising on municipal property specifically? So I guess there's a couple questions there.
Yeah. So what I would say to that is, the particular thing about this advertising is this is the leading killer of this age group worldwide. That's what makes alcohol advertising stand out. Yes, they can see those in those other places, but your local ball diamond is something that you control. And the point here is we want to reduce youth exposure to this kind of marketing wherever we can, because the research shows that the more exposed they are, the more likely they are, in particular, to progress to binge and hazardous drinking. In terms of research specifically on alcohol advertising on municipal property, no, it's very difficult to pull out the individual effects, because kids are seeing so much of it in so many different places. At the same time, as I said, this is a place where local control can be active, and any place where we can take this out of kids' view is a place where we can combat the normalization of this. What the marketing does is it seeks to normalize the beverage in every area of people's lives, and kids are particularly sensitive to this. I sometimes refer to alcohol marketing as wallpaper, in that it's just there, people get so used to it, and questioning that makes the wallpaper visible and is a great opportunity for community education. around the effects of alcohol on kids and the effects of alcohol marketing on kids.
Thank you for
the
that.
Next question for me, sure, was about family-oriented beer festivals. And just very quickly, this is another area for local control, a lot of similar points. But also there's a great example from the U.S. years ago. The tribal festivals, the dance contests, were being sponsored by Coors Beer. And, you know, indigenous peoples in the U.S. have incredible alcohol problems, dating from a terrible history of alcohol being used as an instrument of colonization. And the community pushed back and said, basically, our 4- and 5-year-olds shouldn't be wearing a tag that says Coors when they want to compete. We consume other things besides beer. And they did that enough, and Borden's, the dairy company, moved in and took over the sponsorship. The point is, these are opportunities for local control, for local input. And if local voices aren't heard, if we aren't at the table, then all the push will come from the industry, and there will just be more everywhere.
And that's a really good point. We our subcommittee had an opportunity to meet with Michael Purley, who does a lot of advocacy, tobacco advocacy, with the Council for Tobacco-Free Ontario, and he recommended that, in fact, public health and other stakeholders start doing some work at the municipal level, because historically with tobacco, that's where things started with local bylaws, etc. So it's something to think about. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I just see a question posted by a Windsor Essex County Health Unit about recommendations for addressing marketing at the local level. Besides promoting social responsibility and reducing health harms and injury, what other things can be used to get buy-in from event organizers and local businesses to address their concerns that they will lose business? Well, I'm not from the business side of things. I'm from the public health side of things. But one thing we did do in Quebec in the Sherbrooke community in the past 18 months, and that has been rather successful, is we've been documenting all alcohol-related medical emergencies that happen at our local hospital. We now have data that go back to 2012, where we've been able to show that one youth aged between 12 and 24 is being taken to the ER every second day for an alcohol-related medical emergency. The cool thing with these data is that they've also allowed us to identify high-risk events, high-risk weeks, and high-risk bars, because we do know when we have more occurrences at the hospital. So in our town, for example, it was week 34 and 35, which are orientation weeks at our universities. But also earlier in the summer, we found that for minors, the biggest moment of the year was week 25, where we have a community festival. And so with those data in hand, we've been able to have fruitful discussions with everyone involved in the organization of the festival. And, you know, those data speak very loud and say, listen, every year it's about 8 minors per day that are taken to our ER because of the alcohol consumption at this festival. So, I mean, this doesn't allow us to tell business how to do business, but it certainly shows them that that's probably not good business. And so working with local hospitals, gathering data has been very useful in our community.
Yeah, the silent majority in these settings often are the young drinkers, the non-drinkers, or the people who drink less, and it's important to reach them and amplify those voices at the local level. Specific things that people have been able to do in the U.S., outdoor advertising is often a thing that people can tackle at the local level. Retail signage, another thing. And then, as the questioners have mentioned, festivals. These festivals often have their origins as family-oriented events. You add alcohol to the situation, they stop being nearly as family-oriented, and getting organizations like parent-teachers associations or other groups of parents, of representing families to be part of the coalition questioning these. In the U.S., it's also the outdoor advertising study after study has shown that the outdoor advertising is concentrated in low-income and racial and ethnic minority areas, and groups in those areas have successfully pushed back on this as an issue of social inequity in order to reduce that kind of advertising in their communities.
Thank you for that. There was one other question, I think that's been answered in the chat box. It was just regarding how to take action to report violations of the CRTC code, and a link was posted there in the chat box for people interested.
Yeah, it can be important to make those complaints so that there's a record, but I would not put all your eggs in that basket, and that these kinds of after-the-fact regulatory systems are just notoriously ineffective.
The OPHA Alcohol Work Group has a bit of experience with that. We've done put forward some complaints to our provincial organization, the Alcohol and Gaming Commission, around some advertising in the province, and really didn't get a lot of response. In one case, the response was, oh, that doesn't fall under our jurisdiction. You'd have to directly contact the manufacturer, and in another case it was, oh, the LCBO was in their rights to do that type of marketing. So it as you say, it can be a little bit frustrating to actually make complaints, but having a record of it is a good thing. There's another question from Emma Moore. Given the role of social media as a super peer in the absence of a total ban, what international best practices would you suggest we consider putting in place in Canada to restrict social media?
This is really challenging. The places where they've been able to do anything are places like Russia and Finland, where the language permits them to do particular things around restrictions. The Fidget example is a nice example of an attempt, but the early evaluations of that are finding that they actually weren't able to do much to affect, in particular, exposure to the social media, and it seems to be the exposure in addition to the engagement that is a risk factor. That said, in Canada, regarding Canada, we're talking about an Anglophone and Francophone society, and for languages that are more widely spread like that, this is cross-border marketing, and this is a lot of why many of us are arguing for the need for a legally binding international instrument like something like the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control to start handling that. Short of that, we're stuck with having to be in dialogue with the platforms. And what we've done with these platforms is we have ceded the social square, the public square, to private companies, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, and so on. These are private. They do what they want. They're not subject to, they're very lightly regulated. Publicizing bad actors is one way of making them look bad. In the U.S., we have a coalition of public health groups that's attempting a dialogue with Facebook, particularly around the Instagram influencers. So far, we've made very little headway. This kind of thing has to be tried, and I would encourage folks in Canada to attempt such a dialogue as well.
I'd like to add to that. Of course, the dream, we could say, would be for Canada to adopt an alcohol act, just like it has a Cannabis Act or a Tobacco and Vaping Act. But when we look at the Cannabis Act, even though advertising, marketing is forbidden, it took me about 15 minutes on the web to see that this law is violated by very large companies that even sell to retail monopolies. Now it's responsible for selling cannabis. So it is very, very difficult to regulate the web. Finland has had very limited success in that regard. In fact, one of the conclusions of their report is that once they implemented the law, the companies became even more successful and at being able of getting users to share their content. There was even more enthusiasm in 2017 than in 2014 for sharing content. So it failed. So I would go in the same sense as Dr. Jernigan and recommend good old activism and public shaming. In Sri Lanka, of all countries, they've been extremely successful at doing a monthly analysis of they do it for print media, but it could be done for the web, where every month they post an infographic that details how many alcohol advertisings that have been published in that newspaper and that TV show and so on. And that has allowed them to have fruitful conversations with some companies, and they've seen a reduction of 27% in the number of alcohol advertising in their traditional media. So just by monitoring the situation and documenting it, they've been able to see some positive changes. So maybe that would be a first step for us also in Canada to organize ourselves in that matter.
I think monitoring and documentation is important. I think, Australia's done a similar type of thing where there's a collective who actually monitor advertising and marketing, and then it's posted online. Okay, there's another question here from Paige. Many alcohol social media pages repost pictures containing their products. There have been some cases of companies sharing photos of underage teens drinking their products. Are there policies about this, and how can this be combated?
So this is another one of those where we are reliant on the companies to police themselves, and there's not a great record of the companies being able to do that. There's also no systematic monitoring of this, and it's difficult to monitor because social media marketing is behavioral, contextually, and geographically targeted. You and I can be in the same place at the same time, and will be served a different ad based on what our prior behavior was in that space. So we are dependent on naming and shaming at this point. That is important to do, and it's a good moment to be doing it because the platforms are under a whole lot of pressure from a whole lot of different corners. Mark Zuckerberg is having to defend Facebook right and left, and it's a good time to be in that conversation.
Besides naming and shaming, also, for 4 years I worked with online gambling instead of alcohol, and it was very interesting when the poker stars of this world came and everyone was trying to protect their own companies, or at least in Quebec where we have a governmental based lottery monopoly. They were really uninterested in having organizations from outside of the province offering gambling to Quebecers. And so one thing we've learned that is sometimes very useful is just sending a formal notice to companies who do things that are illegal. And while we might disagree with a lot of the practices of some alcohol retailers and advertisers, they're not necessarily seeking to do things that are illegal. And if you just send them a formal notice, they will usually shut down everything rather quickly. And that's maybe something that we want to add to the mix of naming and shaming. And it's when we notice that a microbrewery in our provinces or a particular bar that is very popular is posting something that contravenes to the CRTC code or that attracts minors, for example, something very easy to spot, sending a formal notice can be very helpful.
That's
I
right.
want to just interject to people, it can look like this is overwhelming and very discouraging, and I just want to remind people where we were with tobacco several decades back. It was just as normalized. It was being marketed at least as widely, if not more so. And each one of these, each time we question the marketing practices of the industry, we separate out this industry from others, and we take a step towards stronger steps being taken.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for acknowledging that. It does seem overwhelming, Dr. Jernigan, and I think one of the questions that I wanted to pose for both you and Dr. Crtc is just what are some tangible actions or sort of immediate steps OPHA and key stakeholders can collectively take on this issue, and realizing that it's a worldwide issue, it's a pan-Canadian issue, it's not just our sphere of influence here in Ontario. We want to reach out to more national stakeholders. Just wondering what are some next steps that we should be taking?
Yeah, we've talked about name and shame. There is not sufficient monitoring of what's happening, and things like the study that Catherine Paradis showed collect really good examples. Your opening slide gave good examples. Getting a bunch of those examples, putting them into a brief report, releasing it to the press, sending it to policymakers, one way of provoking and promoting a conversation around this. If we don't talk about it, if we don't raise it, it becomes normal, and it's just part of the wallpaper.
And I'd like to add to that, we do know that Health Canada is concerned about this issue. They want to do something about it. Unfortunately, they are being lobbied so aggressively by the alcohol industry, and they're not being lobbied at all by us, and they need more of that. So we need to organize ourselves. There's the OPHA, there's the Association de Santé Publique in Quebec that does something very similar. I think it's a matter of organizing ourselves, and I do understand you might find it overwhelming, but it's not that complicated to describe a situation. We're not talking here about doing sophisticated analysis, but simply observing what is happening, documenting, just selecting a period or a certain, evening on TV or a certain newspaper or a certain website or a venue, what have you, and just documenting it, doing it together, and publicize, sorry, my French, and putting it in the face of Health Canada. And we need to do it frequently and as a group. And I think that's our best chance at this moment. And it could be quite fun, actually.
Thank you so much for that.
One international best practice around this monitoring is from France, which for years had one of the strictest codes in Europe around alcohol advertising. And part of how they incentivized enforcement of that is they levied fines on companies for violations of the code. And if NGOs brought a successful complaint, the fine went to the NGO. And so one of the leading NGOs working on alcohol in France raised literally hundreds of thousands of euros by bringing successful complaints against alcohol companies. Just another way to incentivize civil society to be engaged.
Great. Interesting. So obviously, as what we're doing here today is to just try to pull stakeholders together around this issue, and we have several public health units represented, but also a number of other non-public health stakeholders that have signed on to the call today. From your perspective, who do we need buy-in to be successful? How broad should this collective be in working on this issue?
Well, we've certainly found that a bigger tent is more effective, and that's why in the U.S. in the conversation with Facebook, it's being led by Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids. We've got obesity folks at the table, working on junk food marketing. I sort of represent alcohol and cannabis. And the whole thing's being led by a group called Color of Change, which is one of our leading online organizing groups that's made its reputation standing up around issues of social equity, racism, and sexism.
We actually had an opportunity. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think that if we want Health Canada to pay attention, we need to organize ourselves across jurisdiction. It doesn't need to be all 13 jurisdictions, but at least when you have a coalition of some sort, 2, 3, 4 provinces, it helps a lot. I'd like to remind everyone that sometimes just something small, the Sherbrooke study we did in our hospital, just those data from one community of a medium-sized town in Quebec alone was sufficient to support Health Canada in its decision to amend the Food and Drugs Act last year regarding highly sweetened alcoholic beverages. So it doesn't need to be all 13 jurisdictions, but a coalition that is able to document not only what is happening in terms of alcohol marketing and advertising on the web or in traditional media, but also documenting the harms. Counting heads when it comes to youth being admitted to the ER is extremely powerful. It can also be things that we have tended to overlook in the alcohol field. When I'm thinking about campuses, a lot of students report second-hand harm from alcohol. They cannot sleep because of the noise. They cannot study because of their drunken friends and so on. And these things that we have tended to overlook because we think, oh, it's normal, you know, this is what happens at the university, is in fact not. And these are things that are not difficult to document. But if we can do it across 2, 3 provinces and bring it up to the federal government, I think that would be useful.
Thank you for that reminder, Catherine, to actually reach out and send sort of our side of the story to Health Canada, because yeah, I've been told that before, that they are being lobbied aggressively by the industry, and we need to raise our voices as much as we can.
If you go on the lobbying record of the Government of Canada, you will see that they're being lobbied weekly, if not daily, when there are crises. And they cannot do anything.
Yeah, in Washington, D.C., the alcohol industry has over 300 lobbyists for the 540 members of Congress. That's more than one lobbyist for every 2 members of Congress, which is what I call a very good teacher-to-student ratio.
Wow.
I also wanted to respond to one of the comments in the chat box. We have a post-secondary collaborative in the region of Waterloo that includes students. I believe we need to have student buy-in to help conduct the social media scan. I couldn't agree more. I was just in Scotland last week, where the Scottish Ministry of Health is early next year going to start a formal consultation on alcohol marketing. And they're working with a group there called Young Scot, which is a group of young people ages 15 to 24. So I met with the civil servants, and then I met with the Young Scot group. These are very important voices. Young people will often initially head in kind of odd directions around what they think intuitively is going to be most effective, but working with them, they are at least as open to evidence as adults are, if not sometimes more so, and they really do want to make a difference for themselves and their peers. So I absolutely agree. They're another important constituency to be organizing and listening to.
And there's just one more, I think, or maybe a couple more questions in the chat box. One is, can you please put a link to where we can read about the Canadian lobbying efforts, the weekly and daily contacts by lobbyists to Health Canada? Oh,
I just did. I just posted the link.
You did. Oh, I'm sorry.
And
Thank you.
If you go there, you will be asked to do your search either by period or lobbyist, but just put alcohol in there. I just did, and right away you see what Beer Canada has been doing in the past few weeks. So you can do that. And also to the person who talked about the region of Waterloo Public Health and their post-secondary collaborative group, I just want to say, I don't know if you're aware, but PEPA will have its Ontario Regional Symposium on November 22nd at the Victoria College of the University of Toronto. It is student-led. It is really to get all our student representatives from campuses across Ontario to join forces and come up with initiatives and strategies together that will help to reduce alcohol-related harms on campuses. So you might want to look out for that, and you can email me directly, and I'll direct you to the right people organizing that symposium.
Thank you for that. And there's also just a comment from Sharon. We also need to listen to the media, social media. I've pulled over from driving when hearing a radio announcer talking about the need for wine to cope with a long day. And I asked her to stop. Unfortunately, it's come up again on that radio station. So coming at people.
Well, there's a really interesting thing happening in the media itself. Very interesting conversations about alcohol, particularly among female journalists. There was a long piece in Mother Jones about a year ago by a longtime Mother Jones reporter who was diagnosed with breast cancer, and after the shock wore off, said, wait, I need to report this. I need to treat this like a journalist. And she, lo and behold, discovered alcohol. And her big question, why were we never warned? I've had similar collaborations with female journalists. The level of marketing towards women has, particularly for wine, has increased so much with brands like Mommy Juice and Mommy's Little Helper. And yes, the commenter is absolutely right. We need to be the other side, the other voices in this conversation. And there are allies out there in terms of female journalists who are sort of noticing what's happening in their generation, realizing it's very different from earlier generations, and looking at the health consequences that they and their peers are suffering.
Thanks. We have about 5 minutes left in the webinar, and I just wanted to give some time. We have sort of an exiting poll question that we would like people to answer. Sorry. Basically, the last poll question, and Calvin, I don't know if you can put that up now. I think that's the other one. That's the first one. Okay, here we go. So would you be open to us connecting with you about next steps and joining a collective group to address this issue? If so, please include your email address. And then we will compile that. We've already reached out to a number of stakeholders about this. As Brian said earlier, the subcommittee has been working on this for several months just to try to come up with a plan of how to move forward. So that's great. We're happy to follow up with folks from today. I always find webinars and information sharing like today really gets people inspired, and I'm hoping that we can keep the momentum going. And just while people continue to answer that or to include their email addresses there, I just wanted to briefly summarize by talking about next steps. Obviously, the webinar, as I said before, is being recorded, so we will share that with people. We are hoping to pull together a collective. That may take some time. Getting consensus from various stakeholders on the way forward, I guess building a coalition, will take time. We've got some great suggestions about using individual narratives and stories to raise profile of the issue, engaging the media, being prepared for industry pushback because we know that will happen, developing counter-arguments. And I guess once we have a group formed, just developing some type of work plan that would include just putting together some knowledge exchange products and perhaps an advocacy campaign just to really highlight and profile the issue and what the policy solutions could be for Canada. Any last comments that you have, Dr. Jernigan or Dr. Crtc?
I'm just cheering you on. I believe we can make a difference here, and as I said earlier, this is an issue that's moving in countries around the world. People are succeeding in pushing back against the marketing. The health bad news continues to be bad news. Young people all over particularly in the developed countries, are drinking less. That's the good news. But they're still drinking plenty, and there's still plenty. It's still, as I said, the #1 cause of death and disability among 15 to 49-year-olds. There's a lot we could do, and I'm very glad that you all are getting organized to do something in Canada.
Well, thank you so much to both you and Dr. Paradis for presenting to us today. It certainly got me energized, and I hope it has other people too. I just want to remind folks that new slides will be sent to you. Apologies for the technical issue with the slide resolution and errors on the slides, etc. So we will get those sent off. And just I wanted to put up, just at the end here, a contact slide for folks if you have further questions, or if you would like more information about what our subcommittee's been doing. Ali Shivji is our chair of the Alcohol Marketing Advocacy Subcommittee, and you can contact him at his email. So thank you very much, everyone. And